You are listening to Know You're Crazy. My name is Susan Denee. We all have crazy. What separates us is how we choose to deal with it. I'm going to be delivering engaging and actionable tools to own your crazy, treat your crazy, and turn it into your own superpower. I hope that you walk away from this show feeling the power and strength within you. And never forget to enjoy your journey because you are worth it. Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. This is Susan Denee, and you are listening to the Know You're Crazy talk show, where you are listening to emotional recovery somewhat in the raw. I think it's in the raw. Really happy to be here today. The last couple of weeks I've been out, and so thanks to Transformation Talk Radio, I've been able to do a couple replays from over the last year. And so when I got to thinking today, what do I want to share about? As I do this show, I have a couple options. I can do research. I can I can go deeper with some new terms, something I've picked up along the way, and bring it to you folks, because I geek out about a lot of stuff, especially in the psychology area, the recovery area, relationships. If you've been listening to me, you know I talk a lot about relationships, which today I'm going to be talking a lot about relationships. And then I thought to myself, I could research and do, something on the agenda, or you know what if I just talk about something I really, really know and understand and have been teaching to the women who have been in my life that I've been fortunate enough to mentor and coach over the years. And I thought, I'm going to talk about this one topic. The reason I haven't shared about this topic prior to now, you may have heard it mentioned sometimes when I'm doing a show, or if you look at any of my social media posts, there might have been this one somewhere along the way. I think I did a blog on it once. I renewed the blog. I'm going to post another one. Actually, I'm going to read what I wrote about it, because I think it gives a very good description of the topic today. If you saw it advertised on social media, what today's show is about, it's about codependency, a form of codependency. I say that word because it's the best way for somebody to kind of grasp where I'm going to take this today. But I call it the emotional jacket. Today I was speaking with a woman that's in my life. Through recovery, she came into my life, and she's a go-getter. She does all kinds of fun and fantastic stuff online. And we were talking about an incident where she says, I thought of Susan, and I thought, that's not my emotional jacket to wear. That was the first incident. And then it came up in a second conversation with somebody I was talking today, where someone close to her tried telling her she was wearing an emotional jacket, where she got to say, no, that's not the emotional jacket. These ladies I have had the opportunity to work with, some of them for a lot of years. And so today I'm going to talk about the emotional jacket. I was simply waiting for it to get trademarked, was the real reason I haven't talked about this topic. But for whatever reason, how it came into my life, and I'm actually just going to read from the blog to start out the show, because I think it'll really resonate with you. Here we go. Here I go. Whether John Travolta in the movie Grease wore it better than Harry Winkler in Happy Days is neither here nor there. The fact remains that the leather jacket leaves an impression. Is it just me, or does everyone at some point in their life consider buying a leather jacket? Maybe it is the subtle voice within that is telling us, be a badass. It'll look really cool. Of course, as we age, most of us surrender to the idea that the leather jacket is best left to memories of years lived prior. For by the time most of us reach our midlife, a leather jacket of this sort would only invite giggles from teenagers or concern from our adult friends. Yet we all can agree that a great leather jacket is badass. So where is the connection between a leather jacket and our emotions? Cassie called again. She is upset with how I handled my mom's affairs, Mary said. Those words might as well have trickled out of her mouth like water drops slowly dripping from a nearly closed-off faucet. She had shared similar words many times with me. As I heard the words, I visioned Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, wah, wah. I felt guilty for thinking that way. The truth back then was that Mary's dilemma challenged me. I questioned my ability as a coach to help her discover a new way of looking at her relationship with her adult daughter. Mary's daughter, Cassie, continually criticized Mary about her lifestyle. Mary was celebrating a few years of sobriety. She held a steady job, probably spent too much money on her adult children, and was married to her alcoholic husband who still drank. And she was still sober and committed to her sobriety. Sometimes concealing my frustrations about Cassie's behavior was slippery even for me, and she wasn't even my kid. I said, Mary, I want to talk to you about the emotional jacket. As usual, Mary was eager to learn something new. She was studious in that way. I explained to Mary that Cassie, her daughter, represented an emotional hook of sorts. Imagine a cool looking leather jacket hanging in your closet. You know it's not yours to wear. It doesn't even fit you. It's too heavy, but it looks very appealing and temptuous. Although you understand it's not your jacket, you still put it on. At first, it feels good, looks good. You revel in your idea to try it on. But the longer you have it on, you realize you are becoming uncomfortable in it. You feel the weight of it. It's too heavy for you. It's even bigger than you originally thought. It's also hot. You suddenly regret putting it on. What were you thinking, you ask yourself? Next, you become pissed off at whoever the person was who owns the jacket, blaming them for your misery. It's as if they violated you by putting their jacket in the closet. You then realize you have no idea how to take off the jacket that wasn't yours to put on in the first place. Mary, I said, you wear Cassie's emotional jacket whenever she expresses disappointment with you or herself. You emotionally wear her disappointment as if it defines who you are. Her emotions are not yours to wear. They are not your jacket. There was a long pause as Mary digested what I shared with her. She replied, I get it. Cassie has her own opinions based on her life experience, and her emotions are a result of her life. She cannot possibly possess my perspective of the years I've lived, especially around my mother. How could she? Cassie's fear, frustrations, and sadness are hers to own, and those emotions represent the jacket she wears. When I decide to wear her emotional jacket, I feel uncomfortable because those emotions are not my experience, nor should they be. My job is going to be to learn how not to wear her emotional jacket, or my husband's for that matter. I knew Mary understood another layer of how codependency and emotionally positioning herself within her relationships was working within her life. Often when working with clients who seem prone to wear their family and friends' opinions and judgments, I give the emotional jacket analogy. This allows a reframing of how they perceive not only their relationships, but more importantly, how they operate within them. Many people position their mental and emotional health in response to how they perceive the relationships in their life feeling at any given time. I base how I'm doing after checking in with your mood and disposition is a symptom of this. Here's another symptom. I do not have my agency, my own self-acceptance, my own self-agency established until I see how you are feeling. Ever heard the saying, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around you? This is a good example of someone treading lightly because when they are around someone who appears agitated, frustrated, or intimidating, they recoil and stand down, per se. The goal becomes to identify when the emotional jacket looks appealing and learning not to put it on. That is the end of that blog. I will be posting that, I think, on Sunday. So now, emotional jacket. That story that I just read to you was exactly how this analogy was born. For whatever reason, it came to mind that day when I was working with that client, and it helped her tremendously. Over the years, when I come up with a method or I establish a certain phrase, something that I find successful and I use over and over. The only reason that I really what I base that success around is how often I will hear the women that I've worked with or the clients that I've worked with use that same thing. At the beginning, I shared about talking to two women today and how the topic or the thought or the idea of the emotional jacket was used by them or thought by them, or their partner that they're in a relationship with attempted to use it because it's effective. It melts down this idea of how do we operate when another person's emotions and energy walk into the room. How does that make us feel? Oh, it's easy to say, I'm me, you're you. But when and I'm just going to stay in my hula hoop, I got a hula hoop and this is my hula hoop and you've got your hula hoop, and anything outside of my hula hoop is none of my business. That probably feels like that makes sense. And that likely works for you as I say that on this show right now. But what happens when you go home or your spouse or your kids walk through the door, and let's just say from your perception, they're in a mood. They're having a rough time of it. Let's say you're somebody who's highly perceptive. Us smart ones get in our own way quite a lot. And the reason that is because we think we know stuff at times. We think we know stuff. We become so highly adapted at an elevated ability to perceive other people's emotions, especially if we've worked with people in recovery, especially if we are coaches to individuals, especially if we are therapists in that field, that we become so in tune and so aware of other people's dispositions that we think we know. And if we become too analytical and too overly observing of someone else's behaviors, that we think we know something, ultimately we're becoming attached in a different way. One of the biggest awarenesses I had of how the emotional jacket works in my life is once I had just come up with this working with Mary, I realized that other people, and like I need to separate my own emotion. I'm wearing other people's emotional jacket. And a lot of times, no surprise to many of you listening to this, likely, the emotional jackets that we will wear most often is our family, sometimes our friends, but usually the physicality of somebody else being in a completely different environment allows us the breathing room where we are not consistently attached to somebody's emotional jacket. If you work with people one-on-one, say in sponsoring and sobriety, or in therapy one-on-one with clients, or in coaching even, you might get hooked every now and then wearing one of those individuals' emotional jackets because you start to care about them. As much as there's tools and ways that we can detach with love, a lot of times we can still become close to them. But usually those outside our family who are not living under the roof with us, we can let go of those. We're not going to wear those emotional jackets as much. I will come back to that topic though, dealing in the professional realm, because sometimes we're spending more time with people at work, or we're worried more about their opinions of us in our own family, and the emotional jacket will definitely show up there. But under our roof, I got to take a look at whose emotional jacket is really hard for me not to put on. For me, it was my partner. It was my husband. Don't know why. Would like to think that I was above all that and that wouldn't happen. But what I started to realize was based on my upbringing. And when we really reflect back and we look at what relationships influenced us when we were growing up, what relationships really kind of laid out the framework. Didn't mean it was a great framework. Maybe according to other standards, it was a shitty framework. Like, I don't know. But our upbringing within that household developed a framework in which we learned how to emotionally, mentally process, survive sometimes, overcome, understand, all kinds of things. So for me, being raised in an alcoholic home where the alcoholic was emotionally angry more often than not when she drank meant that as a child growing up in that environment, I was going to really watch how I behaved or how I was positioning myself in that house whenever she was in either a altered state, drunk, or maybe not drunk, but she was the focus, right? She's the focus. She's the one I'm looking at to determine what is her mood in order for me as a little girl at the time to decide on where I position myself in this house, maybe how I position myself emotionally, like all these different dynamics, right? So what happened as an adult, even with all the therapy, even with years of sobriety under my belt and working with women up to this point, was I found that when my husband came through the door at the end of the day, and we were a blended family. And blended families, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of successful blended families. I would say we are a successful blended family. However, we didn't start out successful. We had a lot of learning curves. We had a lot of speed bumps in the way, right? Like, and thank goodness for my husband and I both being willing individuals to live ruthlessly honest, is what I would say. Sometimes we have to help one another get there, but for the most part, we understand and have kind of accepted, not even kind of, we accept the fact that we're going to have emotional days and there's going to be growing pains. And so when we blended our family, there was a lot of growing pains. And as a mama who's going to protect her kiddos, right? I'm going to watch. I was raised in an environment where I was watching. I was watching. I was feeling. I was feeling. And then I was stuffing. You know what I mean by that? You grow up feeling, and then you learn how to stuff the feeling to survive. And it's not that even as children, we were supposed to have the tools to process all of that. It's like, this is all the gooey, gummy crap we get to work at when we're older. If we're fortunate enough to be able to look at it and face it and deal with it, that's that ruthless honesty that I'm talking about. So I'm coming into this relationship and we're in this blended family situation, and he comes in a mood, or he comes in having his experience with his day. And I want to position the environment just right in order to lessen the impact of that on the house. They walk in the door and you start wondering, should I have done this? Should I have done that? Are they saying something differently? Are they just in a mood? Does it have anything to do with me? Did I do something? Should I say something? Maybe not. Maybe they come in a mood. This was really, with me, that whole self-awareness. You think you know stuff. Maybe they're not in a mood. You're misreading the room. Maybe your discernment is off. Okay, there is that. Either way, if there's an emotional hook that's involved, I wear that jacket. I start positioning myself differently based on somebody else's emotional situation, which I'm perceiving, remember. Kid comes home upset. Kid comes home with a bad day. It breaks your heart. You want to make it better. If there's detachment with love, we're able to understand that the child gets to have their own experience with that. The child's in a safe environment. The child will be okay if I'm a loving, compassionate parent, and especially if I'm a loving, compassionate, detached parent who understands that this child gets to have their experience. But if I wear the child's emotional jacket, I'm now going to try to fix it. I'm going to try to position myself differently. I'm going to watch the words that I use. Ultimately, wearing an emotional jacket that doesn't belong to you and trying to maneuver yourself to behave differently in response to an emotional jacket that you decided to put on is the ultimate act of manipulation. Because why would you do that? Why would you do that? I did it because I didn't want to feel uncomfortable. I didn't want to acknowledge that when somebody in my family felt uncomfortable or had an angry outburst or a mood, that it had nothing to do with me, probably 90% of the time. We are each responsible for our own situation, with our own perception, with our own ideas. We are each responsible for living that experience, which means that, and unless I'm really rooted in damage still underneath my roof, if I haven't solved that and I'm walking around with a narcissistic attitude or narcissistic oh my God, just narcissism. I mean, come on. And if that's my behavior in the house, and I'm not even acknowledging others, and for those alcoholics and addicts out there, we relate to the selfishness, self-centeredness that we can absolutely suck the air out of a room because it's all about us, which borderlines on that narcissism that I'm talking about. If I'm behaving like that, then their mood might actually have something to do with me. But here's the thing: if I'm behaving like that, I'm not wearing nobody's emotional jacket in a toxic way because I don't care enough to even notice the other person in the room. I don't care enough to even attempt to discern how somebody else is feeling. Ultimately, the codependency, I had Googled a couple things. If you've been watching me for a while, I love looking at definitions about what other people or what is said about definitions on code. So on this one on codependency, there's a couple different explanations I got. When someone loves others more than themselves consistently in a way that eventually hurts their relationships. When you wear somebody else's emotional jacket, it's not because you're trying to purposefully manipulate, intentionally. I don't think it's usually starts out because you love them. You love them and you want them to make them feel better. Or like in my story, I not only loved my husband, but I loved my children. And so with my children, something I had to learn to really process and in some areas let go, and in other areas really learn appropriate balancing was protect. I am a protector, but I am learning, and I have learned that the protection that I will put in advocating for somebody else, I have to make sure that it's coming from a healthy base. I have to make sure that that protection is more altruistic in sorts and not based out of my own fear of feeling something because somebody else is going to experience emotional pain, for example. So I might put on somebody else's emotional jacket to protect the household. The example, one of the women I talked with today, the example that she had was her partner. She was like in her office working, and her partner came and knocked on the door and wanted help with something in the house, fixing a sink or something. And she was unable to get to it at that moment, but she said, I'll help you in a moment. I got to finish this thing. And her partner became agitated with that and was kind of like, really wanted to get it done now. So you're ready to go. And what she said was, I had to pause and realize that the anxiety I was starting to feel, the heart palpitations, the like, am I doing the right thing by finishing my project or should I get up and go, was her wearing his emotional jacket. And what she said to herself was she caught herself. She didn't have to say anything to him. Because see, this was about her. He may be coming in an inappropriate time. He may have been told not right now. Like he's got his own thing going on. But her reaction to him is what she keyed in on. And when she caught herself getting agitated, a little bit of anxiety, wanting to know if she has to change up her day in order to tend to the other person, she just said, that's when she said the words, I thought of Susan and I realized that's his emotional jacket. That's not mine. That's his urgency that something needs fixed, not mine. I almost got webbed into. I almost got triggered into the emotional jacket of his in the moment. But I'm actually doing pretty good. I've got this project in front of me that I need to finish. And so in the part that I read at the beginning of the show, I was sharing about Mary, and Mary would put on her daughter's emotional jacket when her daughter expressed disappointment in her. When someone decides that how you're doing things isn't up to par with how they want it done, if you change your behavior in order to satisfy them and their sense of urgency or their way of doing things, and you do that all the time, that would be the definition of the codependency that I just read. That's when you have loved them for so long and in so many ways that you are now impacted by how they do things, and you've lost agency with yourself, but it's been done consistently over a long period of time. And now it's not serving your relationship with self or your relationship with whoever this person is that you can continue to wear their emotional jacket, right? Another definition that came up around the codependency was when one person's behavior helps support another person's destructive behavior. Is your behavior in any of your relationships supporting another person's destructive behavior? That's just for you to answer, for you to think about. But we become, in the world of recovery, and I may have shared about this before, but I think in the world of sobriety, and sometimes even in the world of AA, we have done somewhat of a disservice in overly putting emphasis on finding our part, to the point of tolerating intolerable behaviors past their expiration date. When we become sober in recovery, we have to take a hard look at ourselves, and we have to take a magnifying glass to our character defects. And if we are somebody in recovery who's willing to do that, we have uncovered some stuff. The message really is to find the solution within ourselves, but that does not mean that we are signing up for intolerable behavior in others. I guess we do mention that in some of our literature about we don't crawl before anybody, especially when we get into the apology section of recovery. But what I'm stating at with this is when we tolerate one person's behavior to the point of supporting it when it's destructive, that is the ultimate wearing of the emotional jacket. That is the ultimate wearing of it, and that will absolutely not serve you. And so when somebody is allowed to behave in a way that is inappropriate, maybe it's narcissistic, maybe it's a brutal bluntness that kind of cuts a little bit, but then they laugh it off and say that's not really what they meant. Maybe it's their delivery sucks. My husband and I had to work through this one, and he'll self-admit my delivery sucked on a lot of stuff. And so he had to learn how to say things a little bit differently, because what was being received was brutal for me to experience. And it's not that he meant necessarily that, but the way he would deliver, I would remember what I said about our perceptions. We will perceive something and we will assume we are right. Sometimes we are, but that delivery really needed a rehab. And so that's what he would focus on. But if I would have allowed what felt like destructiveness to continue, then I'm just as guilty as wearing an emotional jacket and not doing anything about it. The other thing, the last one I'll say when they were talking about codependency on definitions, is it's an addiction, and this is literally in the world of recovery, addiction to caring for someone who has an addiction problem. Addiction to caring for someone who has an addictive problem. I will take this even a little bit further and say, if you are addicted to caring for people, period, without healthy love detachment, you have a tendency to be telling them what to do more so than asking if they wanted your feedback. This is a symptom of becoming addicted to caring for people past the expiration date. We will become addicted to caring for people past the expiration date, especially in mentoring roles and in our children. This will come up specifically. This will come up a lot with our children. Okay, so before I continue, I'm finally looking at my breaks. I'm going to take a break. And for the second half of the show, I'm going to come back and I'm going to be talking about how do I learn about the emotional jacket as far as releasing it? How do I learn not to take it out of the closet and put it on? How do I identify that this is something that I've got going on? And how do I spot check it like my friend did this morning when she was telling me on the phone that she got it when it happened and she felt it? That's what I'm going to cover when I come back for the next half hour of the show, to give you some tools and an ability to start working on your emotional jackets that you may be wearing of others people. Oh, And I will touch on the professional emotional jacket because that one I also have some personal experience in. All right, folks. So I will be back here shortly. Hang in there. We're coming back with lots of solutions. Be back. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Know You're Crazy talk show. My name is Susan Denee, and you are listening to Emotional Recovery in the Raw. Today's topic I am super passionate about. I've been working with women for many years. This topic comes up often because, let's face it, we are all in relationship with others. There is a lot to learn about relationships. I personally believe the satisfaction in my life is going to be directly related to the success in the relationships in my life. That in order for me to have successful relationships in my life, I have to know where I stop and they begin. I have to be able to determine where I am at with my own agency with self and where theirs is at, and stay within my hula hoop of business and be out of their hula hoop, if you know what I mean. So the first half of the show, I have been deep diving into the emotional jacket topic. If you were listening, then you already have the history on the jacket and where it came from. Feel free to rewatch the show for me to go through all that again. But I did want to touch on a couple things. You know, the emotional jacket of wearing somebody else's, really their emotional, mental position that we are perceiving like we think we know. And then we in turn change how we do things based on somebody else's feelings. I went into codependency on this topic because essentially this is all playing on the same ball field. The analogy I use, the metaphor, is it really a metaphor? Anyway, is the emotional jacket. So recognizing someone else's disposition and maneuvering oneself emotionally to fit their disposition. I think if there was going to be a definition of the emotional jacket, that's it. Recognizing someone else's disposition. Remember that you're perceiving. We really don't know if there's truth to it. I just want to make sure I put that out there. There may be. It may be obvious also, okay? Like if you've got a real intimidating, angry person you're around, right? So there may be some validity, but I always want to put in there that the stories we tell ourselves sometimes may not be true. I just want to throw that out there. But recognizing someone else's disposition and maneuvering oneself emotionally to fit their perceived disposition. So I'm going to decide on what I'm going to do with myself based on how you're expressing your emotion. Instead of setting a healthy boundary for myself or recognizing that what I've got going on is directly related to me having my experience with you, instead, I'm going to ignore this. I'm going to attach to what your emotional disposition seems to be. And then I'm going to maneuver myself. Maybe it's in the house. Maybe it's in the words I use. Maybe it's in the obsessive thoughts I have about you. Maybe I am so concerned about what you're doing and when you're doing it that I've done slathered myself with your emotions for a long time. And hell, it's a wetsuit at this point. It ain't even a jacket no more. You know what I'm getting at? Like, that's the stuff I'm talking about. And the reason why it is such a conflict when you get into wearing somebody's emotional jacket is because ultimately altering your emotional and physical position, regardless of the individual's need, it becomes all about the other person. So altering your emotional and physical position, regardless of your needs, of your individual needs, you alter it, you alter your position, your emotional position, your physical position, and then you make the situation, the moment, all about the other person. What does that mean? That means that if you're a pro at emotional jacket wearing, and I'll throw another term out there if this is a little bit too much for you, codependency, if you're a pro at that, and you're constantly tending and caring for somebody past the expiration date, they don't need you to care no more. They don't need your input. I got to tell you, your kids, when they reach about the age 13, you've raised them. From there on, you'll have some influence. I'm not going to say you can't influence your children, but trying to have control over their disposition or their choices to the point of dysfunction in the relationship. You wonder why your kids don't talk to you. You could be constantly in that state of overly caring and stepping over your boundary and not allowing them to have a voice more often. the ultimate wearing of the emotional jacket that you perceive, right? Um, the other conflict with the emotional jacket, there's a few of them, is using your self awareness to a fault. And I touched on this in the first half. It's when we think we know what the other person is feeling, when our overly ready perception of them is not inaccurate. We've lost the ability to judge the situation accurately. I can't remember if I've told this story on the show, but you get my life stories because a lot of this is how I truly learn. And then what I take in, I learn, I investigate, I geek out about it, I talk to my therapist about it, I read books about it. I mean, these are things that when I bring it to the show, I've done rehash this stuff, and I bring it almost like we would in recovery, where we share experience, strength, and hope. But I try to add a little bit to it. And the story that I'm going to tell you is when my husband and we were having a discussion, and I really truly thought I knew what was behind his motive on something. I can't even remember what it was, but I just remember I thought I knew why he was doing something he was doing. And he had to tell me like 3 times that it's not fair of me to assume I think I know what he's doing. I literally believed, folks, that I was right. Maybe this old adage of, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy, would apply in this scenario. Maybe for the moment, that'd be a nice band-aid, right? But I had to really take in what he was saying, because I caught myself thinking I knew, like putting on his emotional jacket in a whole other way, almost a cocky, egotistical way, as if I knew him better than he knew him. You ever think about that? Like, you think you're reading into it because you've been in around them for so long that you know them better than they know themselves. And what happens is there's a certain amount of disrespect in that regards in the relationship, of not allowing somebody to appropriately express without being prejudged. In the relationships in your life, have you been assuming you think you know for so long that when they do express themselves, you have already prejudged them and thought you know what they're meaning? And so they never really have a fair playing field with you. You have lost the ability to give the people that you love in your life the benefit of the doubt. You have lost the ability to give the people in your life the benefit of the doubt, because you think you know why they do what they do. You think you know it so much that you say it before they spit the words out. Or you're sneaky with it and you don't say what you're thinking. When we get in a tangle of that, where we have consistently wore the jacket so many times that we now believe our own BS, that's a dangerous place to be for your relationships. Because as much as the relationship as a I want to say family unit, but it could be intimate, it could be whatever you want to call it. As much as the relationship, God, I wish I had a word for that, relationship unit suffers, you personally suffer, because your needs are really going to have a hard time getting met, because your overly obsessive mind on the other person is withholding you from asking for what you need in your own life within that relationship. There's so many layers to this, right? There is so many layers of this. And sometimes when we are fearful of not getting our needs met, we do what we do with the emotional jacket. And the reason I called it manipulation is because whether we're aware of it or not, we've manipulated that relationship and positioned ourselves in so many different ways just to avoid emotional pain ourselves. We start out with the intention of love. We care about the person. We want the best for the person. But if it's a relationship that's been going on for a while, we may have taken it too far. But this might be one of those categories where somebody might say that they are an empath when really they're just walking around with 20 jackets on them. And they have no idea how to get them off, but they're feeling so much, and they've overfelt and never really came back and said, okay, well, maybe that's not mine to feel. Maybe that's not mine to wear. Maybe it's none of my business that they're having a rough day. Maybe it's none of my business that they're sad. Sometimes that's what's going on. is we're wearing it past the expiration date, which ultimately will come down to another little, what did I call these? The conflict with the emotional jacket. The reason why it's not a good thing is it's not holding clear boundaries with others. It allows, if I'm constantly trying to maneuver myself based on somebody else's perceived behavior, remember, it's my perception, but if I'm constantly maneuvering myself emotionally, mentally, physically in order to appease the other person, worried to make a decision or go to make a decision, but sidetracked with what are they going to think of me if I do this decision, and becoming overly obsessed with that. That's the stuff I'm talking about. When we do that, we don't hold clear boundaries with others, which means that they never are going to learn to do it differently. If I cave in every time, or if I'm constantly not holding myself accountable to wearing the jackets, the other person's not really allowed to have their experience. If partner A walks in the door and partner B, this was my old story, is so overly consumed with that mood affecting children, affecting me, affecting the pets, and if that happens to an extreme, and I don't learn to take responsibility for my mood and my reaction to that, guess what? You got this cycle going on. And there's all kinds of things we can do. So, and I'm going to get into that now because we're coming in, and I hate it when I get to the end of the show and I've talked so much about the problem, to make sure, or to give an accurate description of, to help resonate with you if this is something that you're struggling with, but you've never had something to call it. Like you didn't realize that when this person said something or did something or came in and interrupted your business meeting and wanted something done right here, and you're getting all that anxiety and you're getting all overwhelmed by that. And how could they intrude right now? Don't they see I'm busy? And all these common sense things that aren't happening, but you're still affected. And then you change your choice. You put on their jacket. That's the moment. So that's the first thing I'm going to talk about is, how do you learn not to put on the jacket? And what are some initial steps that you can take to help heal this for you if this is a habit of yours? If it's a relationship habit of yours. Number one, reflect. I want you to reflect over any relationship that you've thought of while listening to this show. And you'll do this on your own time. You can do it right now if you want to try something right now. I don't know if it'll help you right now in the moment, but it's a reflection for a reason, because you just kind of want to reflect on the relationship and just replay a scenario. And in that scenario, I want you to ask yourself, number one, how do I feel? How do I feel when that scenario takes place? And just kind of check. Do I feel worried? Do I feel overwhelmed? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel angry? Do I feel justified resentment? Like, how do I feel in that moment? And then you kind of make a mental note of that, write it down if you'd like. And then I want you to ask yourself, how do I want to feel? And just take a moment. I know for me, the answer to how do I want to feel was, I want to feel detached from this emotional situation for me. I want to be able to acknowledge that somebody else might be in some pain, appropriate discernment, not discernment that's gone toxic or discernment that's gone addictive. But I want to be able to use healthy discernment when observing somebody's hard day, hard emotional day, or observing somebody's apparent frustration. And I want to be able to observe it and not be sidetracked by it, not be consumed by it. Just acknowledge, love them anyway, and go about my day unaffected. Hopefully that makes sense. The other thing is, do I desire to be separate from all the decision making? Are my relationships, either with myself or with others, giving me feedback that I need to back off? Mind my own business. These are questions for you. Okay, I had to read those out loud to remind myself what I was getting at here. So, in the questions that you're asking yourself, are my relationships either with myself or with others giving me feedback that I need to back off. Sometimes when we've worn an emotional jacket, this could come in married situations, partnerships, living situations, you live with somebody, could also come into with children. You know, are my relationships giving me feedback? What are people saying to me? Are they saying things like, no, that's not what I meant? Are they saying things like, yeah, 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 or they're getting short with me and ending the conversation? Is the kid kind of, yeah, 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 and yeah. And when they're not saying something in response to what you want, do you keep poking them? Oh, professional emotional jacket wearing. That just popped in my head because this can happen. I had a boss I once worked for that when he wasn't getting the response out of you that he wanted to get you on his side of the team. And when you were in disagreement with that, this was the method he would use, is he would just constantly keep asking you questions until he would try to get to break you. That was horrible, horrible situation. But that was, that would have been, I'm giving him feedback. This ain't working, but are you peppering somebody with so many questions, trying to get them to agree with you on why your way is the best way? That's an example of, you could be wearing somebody's emotional jacket to the point where you're trying to get them to change and they're not willing to, right? That's the whole stay in your hula hoop. After you learn what am I feeling and is this uncomfortable for me, in the moment. So if I take you to the moment, let's say that just like all of a sudden tomorrow you're sitting down and something happens and you're like, oh my goodness, I think this is the emotional jacket. In that moment, just be still. The story I shared with you today when she was in her office and somebody wanted her to come jump and do something right away. The one thing that she expressed was, I just sat there and I realized what was going on within me. You be still and realize there's nothing that you have to change in that moment. You're going to connect with your own sense of self, your own sense of self-agency. You just be still. And then in that moment is when, in the moment, you be still, and then you can kind of observe yourself. What am I doing right now? Am I anxious? Did I just feel irritated? Like, what's going on here? Because this obviously isn't a reaction that I want to have in this situation. And when you do that thing you do, right, when you catch this in the moment, you want to pay super attention to it because it's going to be a clue to how you operate when wearing somebody else's emotional jacket and when it gets triggering for you. And so as you reflect through the relationships, and they could be different relationships, they could be at work, it could be with a particular individual at work, it might be, a coworker or somebody who is even sometimes super depressed people. We might have we think we're being good by listening to their depression and really being that person. But in the meantime, sometimes we're wearing that emotional jacket. And we have to understand that when that happens, if you start feeling whether in that situation or another, anytime you start to feel resentment, you're likely been wearing a jacket that you just haven't learned how to separate yourself from, or ask for what you need, or do what you need. These are basic things that I've talked about on the show before. Sometimes, like in the situation of my husband coming home, when I caught what I was doing, I would literally remove myself from the room if I knew he was coming in the door, not because of anything he was doing. He could have had a great, happy day that day, but I was breaking up a pattern. I was breaking up a pattern of my own behavior as far as when I would be triggered to really read the room too much. I had to let everybody have their experience without me. Imagine that. The relationships get to have an experience without my input, without my saying things. If you're addicted to wearing people's emotional jackets, you might be the one that calls somebody all the time. That might be you. Let me call and see what you're doing. Let me, and I'm talking like excessively, like where people can't breathe long enough, right? Because you're so enmeshed with what they're doing or how they're doing it or when they're doing it, that you've yet to learn your own personal boundaries around that. And so really recognizing your own patterns with when and how you wear an emotional jacket is a clue for you. That's going to be recognizing the patterns of behavior that you have so that you don't engage in wearing the emotional jacket, right? So that you don't engage in wearing the emotional jacket. Codependency is a thing. I've had to spot it in my own life, especially with the number of people that I've helped over the years. I had to become clear with some of my motives even recently, helping my immediate family when my dad passed away, how much overgiving and overdoing that I can be capable of. I learned that recognizing somebody else's suffering can be painful for me, but I'm not responsible for their suffering. I didn't create their suffering. Each of us have a responsibility in our life, uh, as far as what we're responsible for in our actions, but we are not responsible for the suffering that somebody else may be under, unless you're abusive. And if you're abusive, you're probably not listening to this show, so I'm not too worried about that, right? But I'm not responsible to I'm not responsible to somebody's obnoxious behavior. I'm not responsible for it. I don't need to be the one who, in a room full of people, when somebody misbehaves, to not say something. I want to be the one who knows how to lovingly say something and address obnoxious behavior, but not wear their emotional jacket. Intimidation, narcissism, uh, all kinds of behaviors like that can really shut us down. And that's us ultimately wearing their dysfunctional emotional jacket. And there's all kinds of different emotional jackets that you may wear. But when you become so consumed with them and you don't understand how to take them off, they can eat you up at times. You can start to feel responsible for it. You can start to beat yourself up over. People are going to have dysfunctional behaviors. And the more positive and more healed you are, the less you will attract, by the way. These behaviors, in dysfunctional people will become less and less the better that you become, quite honestly. But sometimes, for a while, it may feel like, there's all kinds of stuff going on around you. But you will know the feeling of unhealthy discernment regarding relationships. You will recognize the feeling of overdoing it in a relationship and wearing their emotional jacket, because you will know that you are maneuvering yourself in a different way in the hopes of appeasing somebody else and making that experience better for everyone involved. And you will know that feeling and what that is like, especially if you've been a parent in a household with somebody who's moody, or your kids, like, you understand that. And I'm just here to tell you that you don't have to live your life wearing other people's emotional jackets. And you have a responsibility to not wear those emotional jackets and let them have their experience with their own emotions. You are not powerful enough to change somebody's emotions. You are not powerful enough to make them feel something. We are all responsible for our feeling, right? And yet, if you use healthy discernment, I honestly believe that you are not the one going to be causing abuse and harm in your relationships. You're probably somebody who loved so much that you overdid a little bit. And sometimes you just got to learn how to take that emotional jacket off. Sometimes that's all there is to learn. All right, folks. So that is what I have today for the emotional jacket. I will be posting this blog on Sunday. I think I'll send out my newsletter. If you would like to be on that list for the newsletter, feel free to ping me at my website. My email's on there at susandenee.com. I send out, I haven't been super consistent with it, but I think I'm working on it. But a lot of the tips and tools that I give in this podcast, especially regarding relationships and self-development, is on my newsletter. So I promise I won't bore the heck out of you. But if you'd like to be on that list, feel free to go to my website and send me an email. Would love to have that happen. I think it asks you actually to enter in your email address if you go to the site. Otherwise, you can see my social media on my YouTube channel, Know You're Crazy, Susan Denee, or Instagram. Those are probably my two favorites. So there you go. Have a great night. May you have happy relationships in your life, and take off those jackets. All right. Good night.
You have been listening to Know You're Crazy.
Crazy.
And my name is Susan Denee. We are identifying, understanding, and treating your crazy one episode at a time. Tune in to transformationtalkradio.com. To connect with me or Growth Spurt Your Life, please visit susandenee.com. That's Susan Denee, DENEE.com.